Story 1. Hey guys, I want to tell you a couple of creepy stories that will make your hair stand on end. Let's go back to when I was 11, living in a quiet Texas suburb. My family and I had just moved into a new house, the first one we bought after endless rentals in rough neighborhoods. The place was nice, and we quickly hit it off with the neighbors, especially the ones 3 houses down. They had a daughter my age, I'm a guy, by the way, and a younger girl, my little sister's age. Our parents became friends too, and we often hung out together, grilling in their backyard or having get-togethers at our place. It seemed like we'd formed strong, genuine connections. But after about a year, I started noticing things weren't quite right. Sometimes, police cars would show up at their house in the evening, which was odd for our peaceful neck of the woods. I'd ask my parents what was going on, and they'd brush it off, saying, "Nothing special, just a routine check?" Even at 11, I felt like something didn't add up. Why didn't anyone come by our house for these routine checks? One day, I was hanging out at their place, playing and chatting. The daughter went across the street to see a friend, leaving me alone with her dad. It wasn't unusual, but at that moment, he seemed off. It's hard to explain what bothered me, but I got this knot in my stomach, and I thought about leaving. About 5 minutes later, he said he had something cool for me. I think it was old car magazines, which I collected back then. I got excited and followed him. He pulled down the attic ladder and told me to climb up after him. I started climbing without a second thought, but halfway up, something stopped me. He was above me, and when he turned around to help me up, his face, his look, his smile, seemed sinister. I can't pinpoint what exactly scared me, but it was enough to make me panic. I jumped off the ladder and bolted out of the house like I was being chased. I ran home, almost crying, and burst through the door. Mom was home and immediately saw I was freaked out. She calmed me down, and I told her everything. She was worried but thought I'd just gotten scared by my own imagination. But that same night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to my mom sitting beside me, holding me tight like I was a little kid. I smelled her shampoo and felt her tears falling on my face. Flashing lights lit up the window. Police and firefighters had surrounded the neighbor's house. The dad had shot himself and his daughter in the attic after a long standoff with the cops. My mom and I have no doubt that I could have been up there with them if I had climbed all the way up. I still get chills thinking about it. Story 2. Now for a different story. Since October 2019, this girl has been bothering me. We went to high school together about 7 years ago. She was quiet, barely spoke, and had almost no friends. I think we might have exchanged a few words once or twice, that's it. To me, she was practically invisible. Then one morning, out of the blue, I got a message on social media. "All white people suck." She's from Japan, as far as I know, and it struck me as really weird, so I replied, "What are you talking about?" But she had already blocked me. A month later, another message, a screenshot of some Twitter account with my name, no tweets, no followers, just an empty profile. My name isn't common, so it was unlikely to be a coincidence. It definitely wasn't my profile. I got nervous and wanted to ask what was going on, but she blocked me again. I couldn't find the account. I worried she might be impersonating me and asked an old school acquaintance to pass a message to her, but she said they hadn't spoken in ages. I told my friends, and it turned out they'd been getting weird messages too, photos, memes, random 3-word nonsense phrases. I racked my brain trying to figure out what I could have done to offend her, but nothing came to mind. Maybe I offered her some chips once. I decided to ignore it, hoping she'd go away. But around New Year's, my phone blew up with over 100 notifications. She was reposting my photos and posts like crazy. Then came 60 messages. "Disappear from the face of the earth." I tried messaging her, but, as usual, she blocked me. Furious, I went to block her but checked her page first. It was filled with my pictures, photos of my friends, and some random people. I found her brother online, sent him screenshots, and asked what the hell was going on. He was shocked, His sister had stopped talking to him after some argument, right around when this started. He said he'd look into it and apologized. I thanked him, thinking it was over. A couple of months passed, March 2020, and I'd almost forgotten about it. Then, while I was gaming with buddies, my phone lit up with notifications again. My heart sank. It was her again, posting my photos with captions like, "Die" or "Vanish." I blocked her, but she kept making new accounts, about 12 of them. I blocked them as they popped up. I messaged her brother, saying I'd call the cops if it didn't stop. He promised to talk to her, sounding concerned and angry. Later, my uncle told me she'd messaged him, claiming I owed her money. I asked him to play along to find out what was up. She thought he was my dad and started ranting that I stole her laptop, broke it, cost her $1,000, and demanded amounts varying from $5,000 to $20,000, then $80,000. I was completely baffled. Why was this happening to me? I'm going to the police tomorrow because I'm afraid she'll do something else or show up at my house. And this is 7 years after high school. Story 3. Here's another incident. I was 13, flying to London to visit my dad. I usually live in Oregon but try to visit him a couple of times a year. This time, I was flying alone due to a mix-up with dates. Airlines have this service for unaccompanied minors. Tags, help at the airport, priority boarding. They boarded me first. An attendant handed me off to the flight crew, and the first few hours were fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling someone was staring at me. I looked around, nothing suspicious, so I chalked it up to nerves and focused on my screen. Things got weird when I went to the restroom. Some guy about 5 rows behind me was staring right at me, not looking away. I felt awkward, looked down, and kept walking. It seemed like he gestured to me, as if calling me over, but I pretended not to notice. My mom always told me to be careful with strangers, and I knew to only listen to the crew and report anything suspicious. So I walked past, used the restroom, and returned without looking at him. I'm not sure if he tried to get my attention again, but that creepy feeling lingered. The main event happened when they dimmed the cabin lights for people to sleep. I wasn't sleeping, just watching movies with headphones on. Suddenly, the guy came up, tapped my shoulder, and squeezed it. I didn't hear him at first, took off my headphones, and asked, "What?" He said, "Come to the back of the plane." Confused, I asked, "Did I do something wrong?" He replied, "No, just come with me." He sat down next to me and nodded towards the dark, empty rear of the plane. I stared at him, and he added, "I've got money," showing me a wallet stuffed with cash. "Just talk for a couple of minutes." Being young, I didn't immediately grasp what was happening. I was just annoyed at being interrupted. Maybe he could have persuaded me if he pushed harder. But then a woman behind me, who had heard everything, ripped off her sleep mask and snapped, "He's not interested. Get back to your seat, or I'll call a flight attendant." The guy backed off, put away his wallet, pulled his mask back on, and turned away. She told me, "If he comes back, wake me or call the crew. Use the mid-cabin restroom, it's brighter." She patted my shoulder, and I thanked her. She didn't go back to sleep, keeping an eye on him. The rest of the flight was quiet. The woman, who was traveling with her son, asked where I was going and who was meeting me. Hearing my dad would be there, she relaxed and offered to walk with me to baggage claim. We landed, I saw my dad, said goodbye to her, and never saw the weird guy again. The whole thing was so strange I almost forgot about it. But looking back, the thought of what he wanted gives me the creeps. I'm glad I never found out. Story 4. Now, about working security at an old power plant in Arizona. There was a plot of land with a cemetery that the company had bought, and they were relocating the coffins at night to avoid disrupting daytime traffic. 2 guards were stationed at the main gate logging what was moved out, and 2 others were at the graveyard itself, watching for looters or junkies who might try to steal stuff from the graves. After one of our guys got shot by some creep, luckily he survived, they allowed us to carry weapons. I had a pistol, but that week they issued me a shotgun, and our lieutenant carried a rifle at the cemetery. The night started normally. I was in the guard booth watching some sci-fi movie when the radio exploded with shouts from the excavation site. They said someone was trespassing, a tall woman with short hair. We'd had local teens sneak in before to hang out, but this time, everyone was on edge. The lieutenant told me to follow him. I grabbed my shotgun, and we put on respirators because of asbestos. We moved quietly to avoid getting shot. On the 4th floor, we spotted her climbing the stairs. I was about to shout, but my partner pulled me back and whispered, "Look at her." I didn't get it until I looked closer. She vanished, probably went higher up. The lieutenant was shaking. We were all pale. My partner said, "Dude, her feet weren't moving." The lieutenant dragged us back to the booth, told the excavation crew to clear out, and we tried to calm down. Then someone yelled over the radio, "She's on the roof!" We ran out and saw her on the far edge, an area with no access. That was my breaking point. I quit on the spot. The others did too. We threw our uniforms in the booth and left. I heard the lieutenant quit later too, after handing over camera footage to management. That job was the creepiest I've ever had. When I saw her on the roof, she had no legs. Story 5. Here's another one. Last year, I was taking a late-night walk around my neighborhood in Colorado, where I rent an apartment. It's usually quiet, but there's an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town that people tell stories about. They say a gang used to operate there until they got busted, and now only transients and teenagers hang out there. I was walking past on my way home from work, and curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out. I turned on my phone's flashlight and slipped through a hole in the fence. Inside, it was dark and smelled damp and rusty. I took a few steps in, and suddenly my flashlight beam caught a silhouette, someone standing near the far wall. I froze, figuring it was a homeless person, and yelled, "Hey, who's there?" Silence. Then the figure twitched and started moving towards me, but weirdly, like it was gliding. I shone the light brighter. It was a man, maybe in his 50s, wearing an old jacket, but his face, it was like a mask, totally emotionless. I backed away, and he sped up. My heart pounded, and I bolted for the exit. I got out and looked back. No one. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but a few days later, my neighbor mentioned seeing someone similar there at night, saying the person had empty eyes. I haven't gone back since. I don't know who or what it was, but the feeling that it's still there won't leave me. Story 6. Hey guys, it's me again with another batch of creepy stories. This happened when I was 16, working at a diner in Nevada. There was this regular customer, Jack, around 40, always wore a beat-up cap. He'd come in a couple of times a week, grab coffee and a burger, and sit silently in the corner. He was polite but odd, never made eye contact, and muttered to himself. One night, I was closing up, taking out the trash, and saw him by the back door. He was just standing there, staring at me, motionless. I asked, "What's up, Jack?" He didn't say anything, then stepped closer and whispered, "You hear them too, right?" I didn't know what he meant and asked him again, but he just shook his head and walked off into the darkness. The next day, my boss told me Jack used to work at a slaughterhouse until he had a breakdown, said he heard the voices of dead cows. After that, I started noticing him sometimes standing outside the diner at night, even when we were closed. I don't know what he wanted, but seeing his shadow always sent a chill down my spine. Story 7. This story happened during a fishing trip in Michigan a couple of years ago. I went with my brother and his buddy to a lake where we usually catch bass. The night was clear, the moon was bright, and we decided to stay by the water longer. Around midnight, my brother went to the car for more beer, leaving me and his friend by the campfire. Suddenly, we heard a sound from the woods, like snapping twigs, but rhythmic, like footsteps. We shone our flashlights. Nothing, just swaying trees. A minute later, the sound returned closer, and I spotted a shadow between the pines, tall, thin, moving jerkily. My friend whispered, "That's not a bear." We yelled for my brother to come back, and the shadow stopped. I shone the light again, and for a second, it looked like it had no face, just a dark patch. My brother ran back, and we bolted to the car, leaving our fishing rods behind. Later, an old-timer at a local bar said people had seen the tall one at that lake, but nobody knows what it is. I don't go back there anymore. Story 8. Here's another one, from my old office job in Kansas. I was an intern back then, running errands and getting coffee. The building had an archive in the basement, dark, dusty, filled with old boxes. One day, the boss sent me down there for some reports. I went down, flipped the light switch, but the bulbs flickered, and half didn't work. While digging through folders, I heard a rustling sound, like someone flipping pages behind the shelves. I thought it was rats, but the rustling got louder, and I heard breathing, hoarse, slow. I peeked around the shelves. Nobody. I called out, "Hey, anyone here?" Silence, then something fell from the top shelf, an old folder. I picked it up, and inside was a photo of some guy in a uniform, his eyes blacked out with a marker. My heart jumped. I grabbed my reports and flew upstairs. A coworker later told me a janitor had hanged himself in the basement years ago, and it's been noisy ever since. I never went back down there. Story 9. This happened in college, in Alabama. I lived in a first-floor dorm room, window facing the parking lot. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to tapping on the glass. I thought it was my neighbor who forgot his keys, but outside stood some guy I didn't know. Maybe 20, wearing a hoodie, pale face. He was tapping and staring right at me, unblinking. I asked through the glass, "What do you want?" He stayed silent, just kept tapping, 3 times, paused 3 times again. I called campus security, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. The next morning, I found a scrap of paper under the window with an eye drawn on it and the word, "seeing," written below. The security guard said it was probably a prank, but a week later, I saw the same guy near the cafeteria, standing far off, just watching. I complained to the dean and got moved to a different room. I don't know who he was, but I couldn't sleep near a window after that. Story 10. Last one for today, about a trip to the Colorado mountains with friends last winter. We rented a cabin at the base to go skiing. The first night, it was snowing, and we were sitting by the fireplace when we heard a howl, not like wind, but low and drawn out. We went out onto the porch, shone flashlights. Empty, just tracks in the snow, but not animal tracks, more like long dragged marks, as if someone had dragged a plank. The next morning, the tracks led into the woods but stopped abruptly at the tree line. One of us, Dan, said it sounded like the old local legend of the snow walker, some kind of ghost that wanders the mountains. We laughed it off, but the next night, the howling returned, and a kitchen window cracked on its own. We left a day early. I don't know what it was, but I'm not setting foot in those mountains again. Story 11. Hey guys, Tom Carter here with another round of creepy stories. This one happened last year when I was renting an apartment in a Florida suburb. Across from my place stood an old barn, abandoned for about 10 years. At night, I'd hear creaking sounds coming from it, like someone walking around, but I always blamed it on the wind. One evening, coming home from work, I noticed a faint, flickering light through a crack in the boards, like candlelight. I decided to investigate, grabbed my flashlight, and headed over. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, it smelled like mold. I shone my light around, empty, just some old crates. But in the corner lay a rag doll with a painted face I hadn't seen there before. As I looked at it, the light inside the barn flickered again, even though I hadn't turned anything on. I spun around, nobody. I bolted out of there. The next morning, the barn looked normal, no doll in sight. My neighbor later mentioned that an old woman used to live there, sewing toys, and after she died, people kept finding them all over the neighborhood. I haven't gone near it since. Story 12. This happened at a party in Georgia when I was 19. A friend dragged me to his cousin's house, big, old, lots of rooms. People were hanging out, music blasting, but I noticed one door on the second floor was always closed. I asked the host what was behind it, and he just joked. Family secrets. Later, when things quieted down, I decided to take a peek. I opened the door, stairs leading down, dark, with a musty smell. I didn't go down, but I heard whispering, low, like someone calling. I closed the door and went back to my friends, but I felt like I was being watched all night. The next morning, the cousin admitted they found old letters in the basement from some ancestor who claimed to talk to shadows. He said it was best not to go down there. I wasn't planning to, but that whisper still echoes in my head sometimes. Story 13. Here's another one, from a trip to New Mexico. I was with some buddies for the weekend, staying at a motel off the highway. At night, I went down the hall to get water from the vending machine, and there was this guy standing there, tall, wearing a trench coat, hood pulled up. He wasn't moving, just staring at the wall. I walked past, got my water, and on the way back, he turned. I couldn't see his face, just his eyes shining like a cat's in the dark. I asked, "Everything all right, man?" He nodded but didn't reply, so I went back to my room. In the morning, I asked the front desk clerk who he was, but the clerk said no one else had checked in on our floor that night besides us. The security cameras showed an empty hallway at the time I saw him. My friends thought I'd had too much to drink, but I know he was standing there. Still creeps me out. Story 14. This story is from my first year in California, working the night shift at a convenience store. It was a quiet shift, hardly any customers. Around 1 a.m., a guy came in, skinny, ripped t-shirt, bloodshot eyes. He bought a pack of cigarettes and asked, "Have you ever seen the end?" I figured he was high and muttered, "Don't know what you mean." He smirked and left. An hour later, he came back, but he looked completely different, clean, wearing a suit, hair combed. He bought cigarettes again and said the exact same thing. "Have you ever seen the end?" I got angry, told him to get lost, and he left, chuckling. The security cameras only caught the first encounter. He wasn't there the second time. My coworker later said these doubles were a local legend, but I still wonder what that was all about. Story 15. Last one for this batch, about the woods in Oklahoma where I used to go hunting with my dad. We set up camp by the river, everything peaceful. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound, like something scratching the tent. I shone my flashlight, nothing, just branches moving. Dad was asleep, so I went out to check. I saw footprints around the campsite, small, like a child's, but barefoot, even though the ground was freezing. In the morning, I showed Dad. He figured it was probably a raccoon, but then I found a feather, long, black, not from any local bird. As we were packing up, I heard giggling from the bushes, but found no one. Dad later remembered hearing stories about little people in those woods who scare hunters. We left, but I still have that feather, and it gives me the creeps. Story 16. Hey guys, Tom Carter back with more creepy tales. This happened last month when I was staying over at a friend's place in Idaho. His house is by an old dirt road, with a field stretching out beyond it. At night, I stepped onto the porch for a smoke and heard rustling, like someone walking through tall grass. I shone my phone light, nothing, just the stalks swaying. But then I noticed a figure in the distance, dark, hunched over, standing perfectly still. I yelled, "Hey, who's there?" Nothing. A second later, the figure vanished, like it dissolved into thin air. I went back inside, told my friend, and he just smirked, saying the locals call it the field man, supposedly the ghost of a farmer who died out there 100 years ago. I laughed it off, but I heard footsteps outside the window all night, even though no one was there. I left the next morning and don't plan on going back. Story 17. This story took place on a construction site in Texas where I worked one summer. We were renovating an old warehouse and found a bricked-up doorway in the basement. The foreman told us to open it up. Behind it was a small room, empty except for scratches all over the walls, like someone had clawed at them. While we were working in there, one of the guys, Sam, said he heard knocking from inside the wall, even though it was solid. That night, I stayed late to finish some layouts, and the knocking started again, dull, rhythmic. I went over to the doorway, shone my light. Silence. But when I turned away, something slammed, and the light bulb overhead shattered. I bolted upstairs. The next morning, Sam showed me a picture on his phone. It was the room, but in the corner was a shadow I hadn't seen. The foreman dismissed it as nothing, but I didn't work there anymore after that. Story 18. Here's another one, from a beach in South Carolina. I was there with friends a couple of years ago, hanging out by a bonfire at night. The waves were crashing, everyone was relaxed, but I noticed the water near the shore looked strangely dark, like ink. I decided to check it out, walked closer, and suddenly a hand shot out of the water, pale, thin, reaching for me. I jumped back, yelled, and my friends ran over. We shone flashlights, nothing, just foam. They thought I'd imagined it, but then one of them found a wet bracelet on the sand, old, with a faded inscription. A local fisherman later told us a guy drowned in those waters about 50 years ago, and people still see him. We left the next morning, and I don't swim there anymore. Story 19. This happened in a bar in Montana where I sometimes hung out after work. One night, an old man walked in, bald, wearing a long coat, sat in the corner, and ordered a whiskey. He sat quietly, but I noticed he was staring intently at the mirror behind the bar, even though nothing was reflecting in it. Not him, not the lights. I went closer, asked, "Everything okay?" He nodded and said, "It's following me." I figured he was drunk and walked away, but an hour later, the bartender said the old man left without paying. We checked the security footage. He wasn't there, just an empty stool. One of the regulars whispered it was the mirror drifter, who shows up before trouble. The next day, the bar burned down due to faulty wiring. I don't know if it's connected, but I still get chills. Story 20. Last one for today, about an abandoned church in Arkansas. I was driving through a small town with a buddy, and he suggested stopping to check it out for photos. The building was old, windows broken, covered in dust and cobwebs inside. As we walked around, I heard singing, faint, like a choir, but I couldn't make out the words. My friend didn't hear anything, said I was imagining things. We reached the altar, and there lay a Bible, open, despite everything around it being filthy. I picked it up, and the singing got louder. My friend turned pale. Now he heard it too. We dropped the book and ran back to the car. On the way, he admitted he saw a shadow near the entrance when we went in but didn't say anything. Locals later told us the church was closed after the pastor disappeared, and ever since, people hear singing. I'm never going near that place again. Story 21. Hey guys, Tom Carter here with another dose of creepy stories. This happened last fall while I was helping my uncle in his garage in Wyoming. He was fixing up an old truck, and I was handing him tools. In the corner stood a rusty barrel he never touched. While we were working late one night, I heard a faint but distinct tapping sound from inside it, like someone drumming their fingers. I asked my uncle what was in there, and he just grumbled, "None of your business." Later, when he went to grab a beer, I went closer. The tapping started again, and the barrel rocked slightly. I didn't dare open it, but the next morning, my uncle told me he'd found it at the dump. Inside was an old diary belonging to some trucker who disappeared back in the 80s. He said sometimes, he knocks. I stopped staying late at the garage after that. Story 22. This story happened at a lake in Minnesota where I was vacationing with family. We rented a boat to go fishing and decided to dock at a small island in the middle of the lake towards evening. There was an old, cracked pier and lots of dry branches. While my dad started a campfire, I walked along the shore and found a rusty knife, bent blade, handle wrapped in cloth. I picked it up, and suddenly the water nearby started churning, even though there was no wind. I showed it to my dad. He frowned and told me to throw it away. I tossed the knife into the lake, but that night I woke up to splashing sounds, like someone paddling towards our boat. I shone my flashlight. Nothing, just ripples on the water. In the morning, Dad said a fisherman drowned near that island about 30 years ago, and people still find his knife sometimes. We never went back to that island. Story 23. Here's another one, from a night shift at a gas station in Nebraska. I had just started, and they put me on the midnight to morning shift. Around 3 a.m., a car pulled up, an old sedan, headlights off. A guy got out, maybe in his 50s, wearing dark sunglasses even though it was pitch black. He bought a coffee but didn't drink it, just stood by the window looking out at the road. After about half an hour, he walked over to me and asked, "Do you see them?" I asked, "See vous?" He nodded towards the empty highway and left. The car drove off without making a sound, no engine noise, nothing. In the morning, my coworker said those kinds of visitors stop by sometimes, and it's best to ignore them. I still wonder what he meant. Story 24. This happened during a hike in Oregon a couple of years ago. My buddies and I were hiking a mountain trail, camping out in tents. On the second night, I woke up smelling something sharp, like burning plastic. I went out to check. The campfire was long dead, but I saw a light flickering in the woods, red, pulsing. I thought it might be another camper's flashlight and yelled, "Hey, anyone there?" The light went out, and the smell got stronger. The next morning, about 100 yards from our camp, we found a clearing. The grass was scorched in a circle, and in the center was a rock with an arrow carved into it. None of us had been over there. Later, a ranger told us people see lights in that area, but nobody knows where they come from. We cut the trip short and left. Story 25. Last one for today, about an old farm in Kentucky where I visited my sister for the weekend. The owner rented us the house and lived in a trailer nearby. At night, I heard creaking from the attic, slow, like footsteps. I thought it was squirrels, but my sister said she saw a shadow in the window, even though the lights were off. We went upstairs with a flashlight, empty, except for an old chest in the corner. We opened it. Inside were children's shoes and a family photo, but the faces were scratched out. The creaking started again, right above us. The next morning, the owner told us a little girl disappeared from the farm back in the 60s, and ever since. She walks around. We packed our bags and left by lunch. Story 26. Hey guys, Tom Carter back with another batch of spooky tales. This happened last year when I stayed overnight at a motel in Arizona after a long drive. The room was cheap, walls thin, and I could hear the guy next door turn on his TV. But around midnight the sound changed. Instead of the news, it was whispering, fast and unintelligible. I knocked on the wall, thinking it was a radio, but the whispering got louder, seeming to come from inside my room. I peeked into the hallway, empty, the neighbor's room dark. I went back in, and there was a coin on the nightstand that hadn't been there before. In the morning, the clerk said an old man used to live in that wing, always muttering to himself, right up until he died there. I left and haven't stayed there since. Story 27. This story took place at a fair in Ohio where I went with friends. We rode the rides, ate cotton candy, the usual stuff. In the evening, we stopped by a fortune teller's tent, an old woman with cards and a crystal ball. She looked at me and said, "A shadow follows you." I laughed, gave her $5 and left. But later, I noticed my shadow on the ground looked longer than it should, even though the lights were low. My friends didn't see anything, said I was imagining it. That night, walking to my car, my shadow twitched, like it stepped sideways on its own. The next morning, I found a tarot card under my windshield wiper, depicting a figure with no face. I don't go to fairs anymore. Story 28. Here's another one, from working at a cafe in Vermont. I was washing dishes in the back when I heard a clink, like a spoon falling. I checked. Everything was in place. A minute later, the same sound, and I noticed the coffee pot on the counter was vibrating slightly on its own. I called the manager, but when he came over, everything stopped. Later that night, before closing, I saw a woman's reflection in the window, wearing an old dress, standing right behind me. I spun around, nobody. The manager later told me the cafe was built on the site of an old house where the owner died back in the 50s. People had seen her a few times, but I didn't believe it until it happened to me. I found a new job a week later. Story 29. This happened in a park in Indiana where I was walking my dog. It was evening, not many people around, and we were on the path near the pond. Suddenly, my dog started growling, staring intently into the bushes. I shone my flashlight. A little boy was standing there, maybe 10 years old, wearing wet clothes, just staring at me without moving. I called out, "Hey, are you lost?" He didn't say anything, just stepped back and vanished into the darkness. Back home, I told my sister, and she found an old news article. A boy drowned in that pond about 40 years ago, and people still see him. My dog refuses to go near that pond now, and I avoid the park altogether. Story 30. Last one for this set, about an old school in Mississippi I used to bike past. The building's abandoned, windows boarded up, but locals say it's noisy. One evening, I stopped by the fence and heard laughter, childlike, but somehow empty. I peeked through a gap. The swings in the yard were moving, though there was no wind. I decided to record it on my phone, but when I turned the camera on, the laughter stopped, and a tall shadow, not like a child's, flickered across the screen. I bolted home. That night, I heard tapping on my window, even though I live on the second floor. I don't bike that way anymore. Story 31. Hey guys, Tom Carter here with another batch of creepy stories. This happened last summer when I was driving through the Nevada desert. I stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, just one pump, a tiny store, and dead silence. While filling the tank, I noticed an old sign across the road. Motel, with the T missing. A light flickered in one of the windows, even though the building looked completely abandoned. I walked closer and heard a sound from inside, like radio static, but I couldn't make out any words. The door was open, so I peeked in, dust, junk, and in the corner, a mirror reflecting someone wearing a hat. I spun around, empty. Back at my car, I found a rusty coin on the passenger seat. I drove off and don't stop there anymore. Story 32. This story took place on Halloween in Illinois, at a friend's party. We were all dressed up, scaring each other, having fun. Around midnight there was a slow, deliberate knock at the door 3 times. We opened it. A kid stood there in a ghost costume, face painted white, eyes black. He asked, "Can I come in?" My friend asked, "Whose kid are you?" The boy didn't answer, just turned and walked off into the dark. We figured it was a neighborhood prankster, but the next morning, we found a piece of candy under the door, old, in a wrapper from the 70s. My friend's mom mentioned that a boy who used to live in that house disappeared on Halloween years ago. I don't go to their Halloween parties anymore. Story 33. Here's another one, from a walk in the woods in Wisconsin. I was hiking with my brother, looking for mushrooms. Suddenly, he stopped and pointed at a tree. A face was carved into the bark, crude but distinct. We laughed, thinking tourists did it. But then we found another carving, and a third, all facing the same direction. We followed where they pointed. It led to a clearing with a deep pit in the center, like a well. My brother said he'd heard about forest markers, but the pit felt like too much. As we stood there, a low, long whistle came from the pit. We bolted back the way we came, feeling like someone was following us the whole way. We haven't gone back to that spot. Story 34. This happened in a bar in Louisiana where I stopped for a drink after my shift. I was sitting at the bar when a guy appeared in the corner, bearded, wearing a trench coat, holding a mug of beer. He hadn't ordered. He just sat there, staring at me. I nodded at him. He nodded back but didn't move. Half an hour later, I went to the restroom. When I came back, he was gone. Only his full mug remained. The bartender said he hadn't seen anyone like that, and the security cameras showed an empty corner. An old-timer at the bar whispered it was the silent guest who appears before it rains. Sure enough, it poured that night. I still wonder who that guy was. Story 35. Last one for today, about an old bridge in Georgia where I was fishing with a buddy. The bridge was wooden, rickety, but the fish were biting. In the evening, as the sun went down, I heard creaking, like someone walking on the planks. I looked. Nobody, just a shadow flickering near the railing. I yelled, "Hey, who's there?" Silence, then a splash in the water below, like something fell in. My buddy said it was probably a beaver, but later that night, we found an old, wet rope with knots tied in it on the riverbank. A local guy later told us a farmer hanged himself on that bridge back in the 40s, and people still hear him sometimes. We don't fish there anymore. Story 36. Hey guys, Tom Carter back with more spooky tales. This happened last winter while driving through the mountains in Colorado. Snow was falling heavily, visibility was terrible, so I pulled over to wait it out. In the distance, I saw a faint, yellow light, like a lamp. I thought it might be a house, but a minute later, it vanished. I turned on my high beams, and the light caught a figure, tall, wearing a coat, standing with its back to me. I yelled out the window, "Hey, need help?" It didn't turn around, just walked off into the snow. The next morning, I found tracks, long strides, but they stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. The radio later reported that a skier went missing in that area about 20 years ago. I don't know if it was him, but I still get chills. Story 37. This story took place at a campsite in Maine where I was vacationing with friends. We set up our tents near the lake, built a campfire, everything was great. At night, I went to the car for my sleeping bag and heard a crunching sound in the bushes, not like an animal, but slow, deliberate steps. I shone my flashlight, nothing, just branches moving. I went back to the fire, and one of my friends, Mike, said he saw eyes glowing in the dark, red, shiny. The next morning, we found feathers near the tents, long, black, not from crows. The ranger told us there are local legends about a night bird, but no one's ever caught it. We left, and I still wonder what was lurking out there. Story 38. Here's another one, from a part-time job at a store in Iowa. I was organizing stock in the back room when I heard footsteps, light, like bare feet. I thought it was a co-worker, but the door was closed. The footsteps stopped near the shelves, and I felt a sudden chill, like ice down my spine. I looked behind some boxes. Nobody, just an old glove lying on the floor that hadn't been there before. I showed it to the manager. He shrugged and said a guy who used to work there disappeared without a trace years ago. I heard the footsteps a few more times after that but stopped investigating. I quit a month later. Story 39. This happened on a highway in Texas while driving home late one night. The road was empty, just my headlights cutting through the dark. Suddenly, I saw a person ahead, standing right in the middle of the lane, wearing a white shirt. I slammed on the brakes, but he vanished. I figured I was tired and kept driving. A mile later, I saw him again, same silhouette, same pose, but closer this time. My heart started pounding, and I sped up. I caught a glimpse of a shadow in my rearview mirror, like he was running behind the car. I pulled over at the next gas station, told the trucker what happened, and he nodded, saying it was the White Walker, a local legend about a hit-and-run victim. I don't take that road anymore. Story 40. Last one for this round, about an old movie theater in Oklahoma where I caught a late-night showing. The theater was almost empty, playing an old black and white film. Halfway through, I heard coughing, raspy, close by. I looked around, nobody near me, just a shadow on the wall that looked like a man in a hat. The coughing happened again, and the lights flickered. After the movie, I asked the ticket taker if anyone else had been in my section. She said I was alone, and the coughing was just the old man in the balcony they'd been hearing since the 60s. Security cameras showed nothing, but I can still feel that stare on the back of my neck. Story 41. Hey guys, Tom Carter here with another round of creepy stories. This happened last spring while I was fixing my car outside my house in Kansas. The garage door was open, radio playing, when suddenly the music turned to static, a low hissing, like whispering. I turned off the radio, but the sound continued, seeming to come from the walls. I listened closer. It sounded like words, but I couldn't make them out. I thought it was the neighbors, but their car was empty. That night, the hissing returned, and I found an old cassette tape under the workbench, no label. My neighbor told me the previous owner of the house used to record voices and then disappeared. I threw the tape away, but sometimes I still hear that noise. Story 42. This story took place on a farm in Missouri I visited to help my uncle. We were mowing hay, and he pointed out an old well in the field, overgrown, with a crooked lid. He warned me not to go near it. That night, I woke up to a sound, like stones falling into water. I went out with a flashlight, approached the well, and felt a blast of cold air coming from it. Then there was a loud splash, like someone diving in. I told my uncle in the morning. He frowned and said a farmhand drowned in that well about 50 years ago, and people still hear him. I don't stay overnight there anymore. Story 43. Here's another one, from camping in a park in Utah. My friends and I set up camp near some rock formations, built a fire. At night, I went to gather more firewood and saw a light in the distance, blue, flickering. I thought it was other hikers, but the light moved upwards against the slope of the hill. I yelled, "Hey, who's there?" It vanished, then reappeared closer, hovering just above the ground. My friends saw it too but had no idea what it was. The next morning, we found a rock with a scorch mark on it, like from fire. A ranger told us people see orbs in that area, but nobody knows where they come from. We left and haven't camped there since. Story 44. This happened in a bar in Alabama where I stopped in after work. I was sitting at the bar when I saw a shadow flicker in the mirror behind the bartender, tall, wearing a hood. I turned around, nobody, just an old guy drinking beer in the corner. I asked the bartender who it was, and he shrugged, saying the mirror plays tricks. An hour later, the shadow appeared again, and the old guy left, leaving his beer untouched. The next morning, I found out the bar was built on the site of an old tavern where people used to disappear. Locals call it the mirror guest. I don't go there anymore. Story 45. Last one for today, about an old house in Michigan I rented with a buddy. The house was cheap but creaked like it was alive. At night I heard banging from the basement, slow like a hammer. We went down with a flashlight, empty except for a rusty pipe in the corner. The banging started again, and the pipe vibrated, even though the water wasn't running. The next morning, the landlord told us the previous owner used to live in the basement, always fixing things, right up until he died. Ever since, people hear banging. We moved out a week later, and I still hear that sound in my sleep sometimes. Story 46. Hey guys, Tom Carter back with more creepy tales. This happened last summer while walking on a beach in Oregon. The waves were crashing, the sunset fading, and I noticed a bottle in the sand, old, with a cork. I picked it up. Inside was a faded note, but readable. It waits. As I looked at it, the water near the shore started swirling like a whirlpool. Even though the tide was low, I threw the bottle back into the sea, but that night I woke up to a sound, like raindrops tapping on my window, though it wasn't raining. The next morning, I found the same bottle sitting by my door. A local fisherman said people have been finding messages like that since the 70s. I don't touch trash on the beach anymore. Story 47. This story took place in the woods in Tennessee, where I was hunting with my uncle. We were following a trail, looking for deer, when he stopped and pointed at the ground, footprints, small like bare feet, but pressed deep into the earth. We thought maybe it was a transit, but there were too many tracks, all leading towards a cave entrance. We peeked inside, dark, smelled damp, and suddenly a rustling sound came from deep within, like rocks tumbling. My uncle said, "Let's go," and we bolted back. That night by the campfire, he told me people have disappeared in those woods, and the cave is considered alive. I don't go hunting there anymore. Story 48. Here's another one, from working at a warehouse in Georgia. I was sorting boxes late one night when I heard whistling, high-pitched, like wind in pipes. I checked the windows, all closed. The whistling seemed to come from a corner where an old, rusty handcart was parked. I walked closer, and the cart rocked slightly on its own. I jumped back, and the whistling got louder, like someone breathing heavily. I told the supervisor in the morning. He chuckled and said a loader who used to work there died of an asthma attack years ago. I switched to day shifts after that. Story 49. This happened in a park in Colorado where I used to jog in the mornings. The trail went through a wooded area, and one day I noticed a figure in the distance, thin, wearing a gray cloak, standing with its back to me. I ran closer, but it disappeared around a bend. The next day, same thing, standing there, motionless, then vanished again. The third time I yelled, "Hey, who are you?" Silence, then the sound of twigs snapping, like it was walking away. I told a ranger about it. He said it was the Gray Wanderer, whom people have been seeing for years. I changed my jogging route, but I still feel like I'm being watched sometimes. Story 50. Last one for this batch, about an old tower in Texas I climbed with a friend for photos. The tower was abandoned, the stairs rickety, but we made it to the top. There was a trapdoor in the floor closed, but cold air seeped out from under it. While we were taking pictures, the trapdoor creaked and opened slightly, all by itself. We peeked down, darkness, and a smell like damp earth. We climbed back down. That night, my friend said he heard a voice from under his bed, whispering, "Lift it." Locals later told us a miner was buried in the tower, and he calls out, "I'm not climbing that tower again." Story 41. Hey guys, Tom Carter here with another round of creepy stories. This happened last spring while I was fixing my car outside my house in Kansas. The garage door was open, radio playing, when suddenly the music turned to static, a low hissing, like whispering. I turned off the radio, but the sound continued, seeming to come from the walls. I listened closer. It sounded like words, but I couldn't make them out. I thought it was the neighbors, but their car was empty. That night, the hissing returned, and I found an old cassette tape under the workbench, no label. My neighbor told me the previous owner of the house used to record voices, and then disappeared. I threw the tape away, but sometimes I still hear that noise. Story 42. This story took place on a farm in Missouri I visited to help my uncle. We were mowing hay, and he pointed out an old well in the field, overgrown, with a crooked lid. He warned me not to go near it. That night, I woke up to a sound, like stones falling into water. I went out with a flashlight, approached the well, and felt a blast of cold air coming from it. Then there was a loud splash, like someone diving in. I told my uncle in the morning. He frowned and said a farmhand drowned in that well about 50 years ago, and people still hear him. I don't stay overnight there anymore. Story 43. Here's another one. From camping in a park in Utah. My friends and I set up camp near some rock formations, built a fire. At night, I went to gather more firewood and saw a light in the distance, blue, flickering. I thought it was other hikers, but the light moved upwards against the slope of the hill. I yelled, "Hey, who's there?" It vanished, then reappeared closer, hovering just above the ground. My friends saw it too but had no idea what it was. The next morning, we found a rock with a scorch mark on it, like from fire. A ranger told us people see orbs in that area, but nobody knows where they come from. We left and haven't camped there since. Story 44. This happened in a bar in Alabama where I stopped in after work. I was sitting at the bar when I saw a shadow flicker in the mirror behind the bartender, tall, wearing a hood. I turned around, nobody, just an old guy drinking beer in the corner. I asked the bartender who it was, and he shrugged, saying the mirror plays tricks. An hour later, the shadow appeared again, and the old guy left, leaving his beer untouched. The next morning, I found out the bar was built on the site of an old tavern where people used to disappear. Locals call it the Mirror Guest. I don't go there anymore. Story 45. Last one for today, about an old house in Michigan I rented with a buddy. The house was cheap but creaked like it was alive. At night I heard banging from the basement, slow, like a hammer. We went down with a flashlight, empty, except for a rusty pipe in the corner. The banging started again, and the pipe vibrated, even though the water wasn't running. The next morning, the landlord told us the previous owner used to live in the basement, always fixing things, right up until he died. Ever since, people hear banging. We moved out a week later, and I still hear that sound in my sleep sometimes. Story 46. Hey guys, Tom Carter back with more creepy tales. This happened last summer while walking on a beach in Oregon. The waves were crashing, the sunset fading, and I noticed a bottle in the sand, old, with a cork. I picked it up. Inside was a faded note, but readable. It waits. As I looked at it, the water near the shore started swirling like a whirlpool, even though the tide was low. I threw the bottle back into the sea, but that night I woke up to a sound, like raindrops tapping on my window, though it wasn't raining. The next morning, I found the same bottle sitting by my door. A local fisherman said people have been finding messages like that since the 70s. I don't touch trash on the beach anymore. Story 47. This story took place in the woods in Tennessee, where I was hunting with my uncle. We were following a trail, looking for deer, when he stopped and pointed at the ground. Footprints, small like bare feet, but pressed deep into the earth. We thought maybe it was a transient, but there were too many tracks, all leading towards a cave entrance. We peeked inside, dark, smelled damp, and suddenly a rustling sound came from deep within, like rocks tumbling. My uncle said, "Let's go," and we bolted back. That night by the campfire, he told me people have disappeared in those woods, and the cave is considered alive. I don't go hunting there anymore. Story 48. Here's another one, from working at a warehouse in Georgia. I was sorting boxes late one night when I heard whistling, high-pitched, like wind in pipes. I checked the windows, all closed. The whistling seemed to come from a corner where an old, rusty handcart was parked. I walked closer, and the cart rocked slightly on its own. I jumped back, and the whistling got louder, like someone breathing heavily. I told the supervisor in the morning. He chuckled and said a loader who used to work there died of an asthma attack years ago. I switched to day shifts after that. Story 49. This happened in a park in Colorado where I used to jog in the mornings. The trail went through a wooded area, and one day I noticed a figure in the distance, thin, wearing a gray cloak, standing with its back to me. I ran closer, but it disappeared around a bend. The next day, same thing, standing there, motionless, then vanished again. The third time I yelled, "Hey! Who are you?" Silence, then the sound of twigs snapping, like it was walking away. I told a ranger about it. He said it was the Gray Wanderer, whom people have been seeing for years. I changed my jogging route, but I still feel like I'm being watched sometimes. Story 50. Last one for this batch, about an old tower in Texas I climbed with a friend for photos. The tower was abandoned, the stairs rickety, but we made it to the top. There was a trapdoor in the floor closed, but cold air seeped out from under it. While we were taking pictures, the trapdoor creaked and opened slightly, all by itself. We peeked down, darkness, and a smell like damp earth. We climbed back down. That night, my friend said he heard a voice from under his bed, whispering, "Lift it." Locals later told us a miner was buried in the tower, and he calls out, "I'm not climbing that tower again." Story 61. Hey guys, Tom Carter here with the final batch of creepy stories. This happened last spring while I was driving through the Badlands in New Mexico. Night, stars blazing, and suddenly my headlights caught a silhouette, a skinny guy in a hoodie, standing by the road. I slowed down, yelled, "Need help?" He didn't answer, just stepped closer, and his face looked white as chalk. I sped off, and didn't see him in the mirror. At a gas station, an old-timer told me it was the desert boy, who people see before dust storms. The weather turned bad by morning, and I still remember him. Story 62. This story happened on the river in Arkansas where I was fishing with my uncle. We were casting nets, the sun was setting, and I noticed a shadow under the water, long, curved, swimming against the current. My uncle said it was probably a catfish, but the shadow rose closer, and I saw eyes, yellow, glowing. It dove deep, and our net jerked and tore. A local at the dock said the eye snatcher lives in the river, scaring fishermen. We don't go back there anymore. Story 63. Here's another one, from working at a store in Montana. I was stocking shelves late at night when I heard rustling, like someone walking behind the aisles. I checked. Nobody, just an old paint can lying on the floor. I picked it up, the rustling got louder, and the can felt warm in my hands. I dropped it, and it rolled away on its own. I told the boss in the morning. He said a painter who used to work there died from burns. I took morning shifts after that. Story 64. This happened in the woods in Oregon where I was walking my dog. It was a clear day, we were on the trail, and suddenly my dog started whining, staring into the thicket. I shone my flashlight. A figure stood there, short, wearing a cloak, not moving. I yelled, "Hey, who are you?" It vanished, and my dog bolted home. I told a ranger. He said it was the short fellow, often seen near old oak trees. I changed my route, but my dog is still scared of those woods. Story 65. Last one, about an old house in Texas I visited a friend at. The house creaked, windows were murky, and at night I heard heavy footsteps, like from the attic. We went up with a flashlight, empty except for a locked chest in the corner. The footsteps started again, and the chest rocked. We didn't try to open it. In the morning, my friend said an old man lived in the house, kept strange things up there, and people have heard him since he died. We left by lunchtime,